Today we're going to talk about genres in literature. Now, there are several genres that you run into when you read. There are 3 main categories, and then those categories can be broken up into smaller groups. First one is fiction. Now, in the fiction category, you can start off with fantasy stories. Now, your fantasy stories will contain elements that are not realistic. You have talking animals, you have magical powers, sometimes it's set in medieval times, lots of times there are mythical beings. Next, you have fairy tales. Now, your fairy tales, magic is used to solve problems, you have imaginary characters and events, usually starts with once upon a time. Lots of times it ends with they lived happily ever after, and always good conquers evil. Now, with your folk tales are stories that are passed down from other generations. Usually it contains some kind of message to the next generation that they want to pass on. And then you have your tall tales. Now, your tall tales have an exaggeration. They're usually pretty funny. And just like, for instance, the Johnny Appleseed story, it'll go in and tell you very exaggerated information about what he was able to do. Now, fables have stories where animals act like humans. The purpose of the story is actually to teach a lesson, and it usually ends with the moral of the story is. Now, your next set of stories for fiction goes into your realistic fiction, your science fiction, and your historical fiction, and so on. So realistic fiction, these are stories that would take place in modern times. Characters are involved in events that actually could happen. All the characters are made up, but everything that they do is possible. Now, in science fiction have stories that often tell about science and technology of the future. They're stories involving partially true, partially fiction laws or theories of science. Many of your settings may take place in the future. They might take place in space or on a different world or even in a different universe or a different dimension. Historical fiction is a story that contains pictures and languages from the past, contains true facts about people and events in the past, and contains factual and fictional characters or events. So you might have someone who meets President Abraham Lincoln, but the people who are with him are not actually real characters or real people that he ever dealt with. And lastly, in this section, we have mysteries. Now, mysteries are novels that have some kind of a puzzling event or situation that has to be solved. Sometimes there's a crime to be solved, and it's centered around a person who does the investigating. Now, next we have nonfiction genres. And out of our nonfiction genres, first we have informational. Now, informational nonfiction tells factual information about people, events, or places. You could have maps, photos, diagrams, illustrations, charts, but it helps to provide you with factual information about any topic that you might want to know. After that, we have biographies. Now, a biography is a true story about a person's life. So someone will actually maybe interview someone, and they go and they write an actual print volume about that person's life and put it out there for everyone to read. The next type is also a biography, but it's actually written by the person that the story's about. Those are called autobiographies. So in an autobiography, it's kind of like writing your personal narratives. A person who writes their autobiography, they write their own history and they interpret their own life and put it out there for everybody to read. And last but not least, we're going to look at poetry. Now, again, poetry is something that we worked on in class before. It's usually short, may or may not rhyme. It may be written in verse form. It has very descriptive language and figures of speech, and usually it shows someone's feelings or emotions about different topics. And almost always you might have some type of rhythm, rhyme, and stanzas. So these are the genres that we're looking at this year.